Your loud voice.
Okay, what I was going to share is a little bit, and this is, let me just take off my glasses because I can't see the crowd. And this is on the generations of my great-grandparents, and they were the ones that originally came over. Carl Grunick and Jesse Hintz. And they had been back in the village of Freudenthal in Bessarabia, and they were coming over when Jesse's parents died that summer. They took ship to America and came over and arrived on the EMS in November of 1885. So that's the only one I've been able to find on the ship's manifest so far through the Ellis Island site. But I got started because this was my baby book, and like many mothers of first children, my mother had time to fill it out. And this is the little tree. And so I knew my four grandparents. One was born in France, one was born in Canada, and my dad and his wife were born here in America. But the generations before, they were back in the old country. So I'm not too far as a native citizen, not too long. And sometimes I run into brick walls because it's over there, but that's where a lot of stuff were. So I didn't do very much for the next time until almost about college age. And I guess this is where, after doing all those research papers, I just got in the habit of looking up facts. And so I asked my dad, he's the German from Russia side, pretty much, what about your parents do you know? And he wouldn't say very much because apparently he was a child. His father died when my dad was about a young kid, and my dad was about the 8th or 9th at the bottom of a 20-year spread of children. So he got lost on the family stories. Everybody was not talking like that. But he did tell me that his dad had married 3 Grunicks and 3 Schraders. And I thought, wow, the family really was inbred. And he said that this made him a double cousin with relation to his other cousins because they were related through both the father and the mother's line. And when I was taking genealogy, I said, that's a nice family story, but how would I ever find what was the kernel of truth underneath it all? Well, they didn't have too much on the Odessa Digital Library because it was earlier. So I was buzzing around the internet and found this Boyd County, Nebraska marriage website that had a list of the brides and the grooms from about the 1880s through 1949. And at that time, it gave the county clerk, and it said 25 cents a page. You could send away for the marriage licenses. So I sat and hummed it, and I was doing this work now about, I think 2000, when I was caring for my mother in California. And so I said, oh, but 25 cents a page is irresistible, it's so cheap. So I made a list of about 8 to 10 names that seemed familiar, sent off to the clerk, said, here's a deposit, send me back what you've got. And lo and behold, we had the 3 marriages in there, and they had a variety of name spellings, but I was able to put, with the parents' names, this were the same families, the same parents, so that I finally tracked it down, and yes, it was true that 3 siblings married it. And my grandfather, or great-grandfather, yes, it's the grandfather, he went by Christ, but his name was Christian, and he was a Grunick, and he married Friederike Schrader. That was in the 10th of October, 1897, in Boyd County. And then about a month later, his sister Matilda Grunick married Gottfried Schrader on the 1st of November, 1897. So I figured, well, it was the harvest time, maybe they had time to get ready for the 2 weddings. And then there was Magdalena Gruneck, married a Jacob Schrader on the 22nd of February, 1900. And apparently I figured, well, maybe she was younger and they had to wait for her to grow up. So that as I was on a roll, I then said, there's more family names, and now I'm getting to work with the in-laws, perhaps they're related. So I sent away and got another 8 to 10 marriage licenses, and I had sent in a deposit to the county clerk and said, just use what you need to. And by the way, would you happen to have anything else with Carl or Christian on it? And I've not been able to find it. It's buried in my office somewhere. As I said, I haven't worked on this for years. And she sent me my great-grandfather Carl's citizenship application, and she also sent the citizenship for my grandfather Christian. And I said, there's something strange. The father, Carl, has got his naturalization, but all of a sudden, Chris just gets a naturalization for free. Why didn't he apply? And then I realized, as a minor, he had been grandfathered in on his father's application, but by the time the citizenship rolled around, he was an adult, so he could sign in his own name. And that's the story of why we won't find all those records. And the other thing that the county clerk sent me was a school census from the 1890-somethings, and this had a list of all the children that had attended the local school, kindergarten, elementary school through high school. And it gave the child's name, sex, age. The parents were listed all down a row, and you had to match them. And the interesting thing is that the parents' address was given as their homestead place. So it gives range, township, lot number. And that spurred me on to look up the BLM records under the Government Land Office and find the original filing. And so I was able to find the various places and see, oh, no wonder they married. They went to school together, they lived nearby in the lot. I plotted it on graph paper. And then after that, they apparently were getting itchy feet, I think. And so the grandfather, Carl, plus the 3 younger couples, all headed up to Canada to apply for homestead land up there. 2 of them came back to the U.S. with Carl, but one brother and sister stayed up there and had their family. And so that's how I've now found that there are Canadian cousins up there. I have to track down their descendants to see if they're on email. And that's the story, sort of how the 3 siblings married the other 3 siblings. So when you find relatives that might marry, check for the in-laws. They may wind up as your relatives too. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll be going next, and once I get figure this out here, I'm going to just have a slideshow of pictures, and
Who are you? Who are you?
Who am I? I'm Sharon Bell. Am I in the?
Yes.
Okay. And this comes from my Great Aunt McDonald's memory book. So my mom, Catherine's mother's sister, wrote down a lot of memories from growing up. So the first is arriving in America. In 1901, Mom and her first husband, Albert Boley, came from Russia by ship. How strange this new land and language must have been. Bang, crash go the chamber pots on the sidewalk of New York. The small children were the pot carriers, while elders carried bedding, food, etc. Many a laugh we had when our cousins would tell us of clanging pots on sidewalks and their mothers scolding them for fear of denting their precious utensils. From New York, they took a train to South Dakota near Eureka. Mom told us how frightened she was looking out of the train window, telephone poles speeding by. She would flinch and scream at this, to the amusement and laughter of the other seasoned travelers. From Eureka, they headed north for North Dakota to file their homestead claim, along with 7 other families of relations. Mom and Mr. Boley hurriedly built a 1-room sod shack, cutting the 4-inch deep sod into 18-inch pieces and then stacking them. The roof was cottonwood covered by sod. Mom said the spring rains dripped down inside, also mud and lizards. Mr. Boley developed TB, so Mom had to do a man's work. To seal the cracks, she used mud and fresh cow manure till they could build a larger, more comfortable home in the summer. The prairie was a strange and frightening to her, since neighbors were not too near, unlike the old country where most everyone lived nearby. What courage it took her to leave the village of rainy Russia, where the climate was mild enough to grow grapes, fruit, etc., and then find themselves in a land of rotting, grassy, snowy hills with not a tree in sight, land of hail, tornadoes, wind, and beautiful, gentle rains and sunshine. They had 1 milk cow, 1 chicken, and a couple of horses to start out this new life. Mr. Boley died, leaving Mother with 2 children and 1 on the way. In 1905, Mother married Henry Schatz and moved east to a farm south of Pickardville, North Dakota. The next story is New Year. Happy New Year! What a joyous time this was. No matter how cold the house was or the weather, we tried to be the first to yell, "Ein glücklich deine Nacht." First one received a nickel or dime from Dad. Chores and breakfast out of the way, chores meaning milking cows, feeding calves, pigs, horses, and also cleaning barns and watering animals. Mother would fill a clean dish towel full of home-baked goods to take to Aunt Carrie and Uncle Carl a mile away. We walked and often met their children, our double cousins, halfway to our place, also carrying goodies. Mom doled out her precious hoard of nuts, candy, etc. to each of us too. Then the fun began. We played with hazelnuts on the floor, as kids now play with marbles. Using a walnut for a shooter, we played keepsies. Whoever won was the lucky one. It took some skill on the uneven wood floor, so Brother Hank won the most. Soon a knock on the door and a yell, "Happy New Year!" And there was Charlie throwing grain all over the kitchen, saying, "Give me 5 cents or I'll knock a hole in your house." It was an old German custom. Whoever came to a home first and scattered grain on this day received money. How I envied Charlie for being so bold. The rest of the day and evening after chores were spent with cousins, aunts, and neighbors, children playing outdoors on the ice or snow, sledding and skating, if some were lucky enough to have skates. On very cold days, the big barns were our playgrounds too. So the last story I have is called Threshing Time. And I don't know German, so I'm just butchering this. And it's Pidgin English too, so. Alle rollen raus, pois gals, work to do. Dad's morning greeting. The small cottage seemed to shake itself like a mother hen when we erupted like a batch of chickens to start the day. No work, no eat was his policy. No one dared stay to bed after his clarion call. Not even hiding under the bed could save you from helping at threshing time. Get ready. Threshers will be at your house next week. These were exciting days. More heavy, long hours of work, but a new spirit enters the air, especially if crops were good and the weather dry. Neighbors helped each other and hired a few migrant workers from Kansas or Nebraska who followed the crops north. The big girls loved this. Loaves and loaves of bread were baked, cakes, pies, cookies, as these hungry men were fed 5 times a day. Mom was a super cook, and the southern men loved to eat her food. 3 heavy meals and a mid-morning and afternoon lunch with coffee were hauled out to the field. Woe to us if for some reason lunch was late, as they grumbled as hard as they worked. Out of bed at 4 a.m. to get the huge breakfast ready. The table was set up the night before to save time. Spuds, meat, eggs, even cake for these young men were hungry. Soon we heard the steam engine loud whistling signals. So early in the cold morning, off they go. We fed from 18 to 20 people, neighbors, cousins, aunts welcome too. On hazy late summer days, you could see the steam engines with chaff and dust flying for miles around and hear their steam whistle blast the air. After the day's work, the southern men slept in the granary or hayloft. On rainy days, when they couldn't work, we still had to feed them. It was like having Sunday company. Evenings, it was a pleasure to hear the harmonica music in the quiet, lonesome dusk. While men and horse rested 1 hour at noon, we women never quit until 10 at night. The joy of seeing the golden grain flowing from the elevator into wagons headed for Pickersville was heartwarming, as it meant warm clothes for winter and paying year-end debts. And that's the story. I need to change the battery before Kathy Linden's next here, so bear with me. I should have done it to begin with.
I wish you could tell us all the names of all these people that are on the screen.
Well, maybe my mom could.
Well, that's the oldest sister who died of TB. This one here, Madeline.
Okay.
I think that was her name. She was a Foley. And this is Susie Schatz and Grandma. And I
Playing
think
Indian on the prairie.
Uh-huh. Where was this actually located?
in Sheridan County, North Dakota.
Some of these are cousins and kids of
So
family.
yeah, that was Susie, and she was with one of her sister's kids. That's my mom.
My grandma Ruth.
You said Sheridan County. What town was that close by?
McCluskey.
Far north.
North of Burleigh County, which is where Bismarck is.
Yes.
Okay, you've probably seen all of those, right?
Right.
A couple times, so we'll get on to that. So, Kathy,
Sharon,
what?
yeah, what type of cooking and food did they bring with them from Russia?
Good.
Yeah.
Germans from Russia food, everything we like. I don't know. You know, I'm so removed from this because I was born in Oregon. My mom was born in California. Now her mom, my grandma Ruth, was born in North Dakota to the immigrants from Russia.
But some family recipes and so forth
Oh,
passed on?
so yeah, so my Aunt Susie and my grandma Ruth, they wrote down a memory recipe book. And so there's a lot of them in there. Now, it leaves a lot to be desired. I go in there, it's like, I don't know how to make custard. They just say, put some eggs and some cream together. You know? So there's some interesting recipes in there.
I have one more question. You said that they played harmonica during the winter time, I suppose, not while we were doing the threshing. But in the winter time, harmonica, you were saying, what type of music they would be playing?
Yeah, and I don't know if they were a musical family. Probably not, because they were Baptists. So no cards, no dancing. You know, I don't know. Mom, do you know if anybody did music?
Not that
I think
know.
the harmonicas were the guys from Kansas and Nebraska, the workers that would do that. So, according to the story. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Kathy.
I'm just going to give you a brief mention about hollyhocks, which seems to be a perennial flower among the Germans from Russia. And we were curious about it. What is its significance? Why does it seem to pop up in every subject? So in the research after the board meeting when we were discussing topics, I started doing some research, and there is quite a bit about hollyhocks. To my surprise, I remember my German grandmother having the tall, beautiful, stately hollyhock flower, and I will pass around a picture on my cell phone of it. And from my earliest memories at her gate, at her white picket fence gate, and it was just beautiful. And I've always had that memory of it. So when I started attending Germans from Russia meetings, and here's this hollyhocks coming up, you know, a bell went off in my head. And I don't know if any of you noticed in the pictures that we just saw, there were at least 3 pictures that had flowers in them. And I believe, I'd have to take a closer look, but I think at least 2 of those pictures had some hollyhocks in them. Hollyhocks is from the mallow family, and it's beautiful colors that originated actually through China to Europe. And there are some significance to them. And I just want to cover a few of the symbols of them. It has obviously a beautiful floral presentation when you see it, but the hollyhock prefers impoverished earth. Now, I've visited back in the Dakotas and Nebraska, and I have seen the soil there. So I can certainly agree with how the flowers, that particular flower, would be meaningful to especially the women of the family, to have a touch of beauty in a very barren looking landscape. And that that particular flower could actually flourish. It would go to seed in the fall, and then it has another meaning of fertility as well, because it would be easy to come up again the following spring, and you don't have to do much work for it at all. But it could flourish in that particular ground. And another symbol besides those 2 is tied to ambition because of the overall strength of the plant to grow in an array of conditions and its powerful presence in landscaping scenery. We would see them lining the fences and gates because some believe their statuesque appearance and tall lengths reflect the impression of protection and safety. And I recall hearing the wind blowing when I was back in Nebraska and the Dakotas, and hearing this howling sound and waking me up at night and asking my relatives, who I didn't really know all that well, what is this? What's going on? And how frightening it could feel that you're just very isolated. You don't have near neighbors nearby, and how that feeling of something tall and big and grand was out near your gate, kind of standing guard, perhaps. My imagination gets carried away a little bit, I confess, but you'll see how beautiful the flowers are. So I came across a book, actually, my research that I talked to Joni about possibly ordering for our library about the hollyhock flower and the significance there. So we're hoping, I have hollyhocks, of course, because of my grandmother's memories. I've always had them. A white one in particular, they have a wide array of colors, but my grandmother had white ones as well, and I have that seed. So to me, it's a heritage seed. And we would like to do a little bit more at a spring meeting, and I'll bring some hollyhock starts that we can share with people coming that day. So this is just a little bit about why I love attending Germans from Russia and being a part of it is the so much variation of the historical roots and all the significance and meaning that's attached with this and how important it is. So thank you for listening, and I'll start here with Randy, and you can see how beautiful the flowers are.
Thank you, Kathy. Does anyone else have, Audie, yeah.
I'm the one with all the questions. Since I'm sitting here, back here, not standing right there. Kathy, or do these also grow in Germany? Is the ground bad enough in Germany that they grew?
They originated through China,
Right.
but then they were carried to Europe. So they also would have been in the Ukrainian area would flourish as well.
I recall, I mean, just generally, that even in West Germany, in northern West Germany, we had those flowers. And I don't remember the German name. Not, you know what they're called in German? Huh?
Hollyhocks? Hollyhocks?
You know what they're called in German? Do you remember them growing in Germany? I thought I saw them in West Germany. But they grow in West Germany. Yeah. And beautiful to hide that. Sandy soil out there.
It's good as a rose.
So does anyone have anything else they want to say, Kathy?
I should have read ahead a little bit. Oh, I'm Kathy Shin, and I actually could have brought something to read if I had read ahead a little better about what the program was going to be today, but maybe I can share it another time. One of the things I was going to say is iris were a really big deal in my family, my Germans from Russia family. My grandmother always had iris. And I'll share a little story about them. First of all, my grandparents came, my grandfather, his family in the 1886, and my grandmother was in the 1870s. And they went to Eureka area, South Dakota, and they met there, married, my grandparents married, and of course, you know, there's not enough farmland to give everybody in your family a piece of it if you're going to make a go of it. So my grandfather and grandmother eventually, after they married, they went to the Sweetgrass Hills in Montana. They followed my grandfather's sister who had gone there. Now, most of their lives they've been involved with raising wheat, but I don't know if it was Aunt Catherine or my great Aunt Catherine who convinced them to come to Montana and raise sheep. But one of the interesting stories was how they communicated, and we actually, my husband and I found the site in the Sweetgrass Hills where they had homesteaded in it. I used also that BLM website to find it. But one thing to let you know is I only looked it up under my grandfather's name. I assumed it would only be under his name, given that mostly that was a male role to play. But I was wrong, because I found out that there was another piece of the homestead adjacent that was in my grandmother's name. So don't discount your female line there. in terms of homestead records. But so they built a small cabin there, and my grandfather actually was friends with, I don't know if you know Charlie Russell, who is a Western artist. He's quite famous in the Montana area. And they corresponded, and I wish I had a letter from their correspondence. I don't, but just the stories of that friendship. But the way my grandparents communicated when my grandfather was out with the sheep, and she was there with, at that time they had 3 children, maybe 4 there. And my grandmother was somebody always worried and was afraid. So I think some of this background is why. But the way they communicated is that my grandfather would tie like a red kerchief around the sheepdog's neck and send it back to the house. She would put on a white one around the dog's neck and send it back, which indicated they were okay as well. So I've told that story to a lot of young people who can't seem to live without their phones every minute. And this is how my grandparents communicated. My grandmother was always afraid. She only had an axe behind the door. And of course, they moved into territory that had been Blackfeet Indian land. So those people were displaced, and sometimes, especially there would be like a woman who might come, a Blackfoot woman who would come and ask for food because they were in really bad straits. And so she would give them food, but she was always still very afraid. The other piece that I might be able to bring it in and read some of it to you sometime, but the gist of it is my grandfather's sister was interviewed. She had married and gone to the North Dakota area. She was interviewed in the 1930s by there was some, during those Depression years, the government was providing some jobs for people.
WPA.
It was WPA, that's right. And she was the only woman interviewed in this area, in the Dakotas area. And that, I have the transcript of that interview, and that came to me through a very distant cousin who, when they were at one of the conventions, she was in a session and her husband was looking for something to do, and so he was looking through the library stuff, and he found this Sophia Beck's recount of leaving South Russia and their journey on the ship and their arrival. And when I read it, I just cried because it was so difficult, and how my great-grandmother got very sick, and she had to be left to recover, and then she came to try to find my grandfather, who'd gone ahead with some of the other kids to get their homesteads set up. And it was just a heartbreaking story of how difficult that was for her to reunite. So another time perhaps, but thank you.
Randy has a poem that he'd like to read, and this is his picture up here that he'll tell you about. So,
Did this at the last minute, so bear with me here. This is my great aunt and uncle, Gus and Katherina Crumlick, and the maiden name was Stecker. And I recently got interested in this again because I had a cousin from Germany contact me from the Stecker family. So I started going through some things, and a few years ago, I was in touch with their son, Emil Crumlick, and he gave me all this information about contact they had with the Stecker family in Germany and South Russia. So when this individual contacted me, it wasn't too much of a leap to find out it was true. And so this story Katherina, she started out in Hofmannsthal, South Russia, and journeyed to America. And she was born in 1893 and passed in 1990, so she lived to be 97 years old. And at the time before she passed, she wrote it in a poem form, and it tells about her journey. So bear with me, some of these words are beyond me even. It starts out, along the Russian streets of Hofmannsthal, a young girl walked. With sisters and brothers, she would go to father's butcher shop. A young girl trod through a weary childhood. Mother died from childbirth. Katherina was but 10 years old. Father's sadness consumed him. He never was the same. The joy and laughter of yesteryear replaced by lonely morosis. Father did remarry 3 years after mother's death, but father was a saddened man. The union was not joyous. Katherina grew in stature and in spirit, educated in Sunday school in the Lutheran Church of Hofmannsthal. She learned of God, performing chores for animals, caring for horses. She did her family duties. A student, worker, and believer. In 1913, at the age of 20, Katherina made her voyage from old country to new, a train trip from Russia down to Germany, bon voyage at Bremen. En Stegel? All aboard to the new life. The January trek from Russia, a May arrival in the United States. You could not go backwards, no choice but to go forward. A fearful heart, a great asset. On the perilous ocean voyage, a woman walked against a stiff ocean wind aboard the Kaiser Wilhelm. No time to view the sights, no time to see the Statue of Liberty. The immigrant bustled through the crowded streets looking for bread. No one understood their speech. A woman walked, confused, hungry, bewildered, in the city of immigrants. I have to stop there, just think about that. I mean, it's not that much different today when we have immigrants come in and their language isn't something we recognize, they're hungry, they want a better life. A woman walked on a train ride to North Dakota, to their future home in Cullum, so many horses, such large houses. In this North Dakota, Katherina came to live where her aunt and uncle, working off the money she borrowed, to come to these United States. Katherina met a young man to share her path on earth. Gustav and Katherina were married November 15, 1915. These two. Lived in the home of Grandma and Grandpa Crumley for a year. Worked and loved, always a bunch together. In their second year of marriage, the couple moved to the farm near Cullum to live and raise a family. 5 sons were born in this time. A woman walked with husband, children following closely behind. The footprints made a larger path, a trail of family. The Depression took a toll. Katherina and Gustav lost their farm. They moved to town, 28 years in that little house, a family raised, a path completed. Soon after Gustav died, Katherina continued in faith of God. A woman again walked. A woman walked. She left her prints. On each soul she touched. Her faithfulness, kindness, love imprinted on each one. She walked, but never alone. Her life is one of faith in God, courage to go on. Our God has not promised a road free of obstacles, but a hand in climbing over. Katherina collapsed that hand. She made it over many. A woman walks with God. Pray that many also be our testimony. Gustav and Katherina story. I do not know. I do not know how old she was when she wrote it. That's something I was not told. So, and Emil's gone now, so I can't ask him.
When did she die?
1990.
1990.
1990 in Bismarck, North Dakota.
That's beautiful.
All right, thank you for everybody that told a story. Joni will be next to talk about, are you going to do a book review?
Just a book review.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have time for the other.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to thank two people regarding this because we heard from Kathy Shin earlier and she donated this book. It's called Sunflowers and Thistles, and I might butcher the names as well. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of German names just looking at them, but I think it's Elvira, is that right? Bissell Van Drick, and it's translated by James T. Giesel, or Giesel. And we have another member here today also to thank because Vivian Messenger actually gave me this really nice summary of the book. And it's the book provides a historical background in a narrative timeline of Germans living in Bessarabia from 1814 to 1940. This is a collection of narratives presented by individuals who had an opportunity to express their authentic stories. And to quote the book, to understand these people in their behavior, holding on to past experiences, both favorable and distressing, was the thrust of this book. Homelessness, resentment, flight, refugees, homeland, left behind. These are all words that are interspersed throughout the book. So it's a theme just going throughout the whole collection. Reading this book gives you an idea of how people think and operate in the Bessarabian society, the survival of a hardy people. So this book was also found in the Germans from Russia Heritage Collection. They sell that online, as well as the Hollyhocks and Grasshoppers, a book that kind of percolated up into our thoughts as we were talking about the hollyhocks earlier. So both of those are found on the GRHC collection. So thank you.
All right, does anybody else have any stories or anything they'd like to relate about their family? Okay, well, we're going to have our food time now. If Renata and Kay will get that ready, and in the meantime, you can use the restrooms out in the lobby and socialize. So thank you very much for participating, everyone.
You want to say that blessing that's in here? There's a blessing
In a minute.